Hello everyone, welcome back to your class on Bible Survey 1 or Old Testament survey. And as we have already studied about or had a survey about the major prophets or prophetical books in the last class, now and also we have done the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah and his book of Lamentation. Let's move ahead and let's talk about the last two major prophets, that is Ezekiel and Daniel. So let's just let me just share the screen right now. Um, okay, so this is the chapter 17 that we are going to look today into, and we are going to survey the books of Ezekiel and Daniel. Okay, so what are we going to see today? Let's see. So today we are going to survey both the books of Ezekiel and Daniel, and both of them were actually major prophets, as we mentioned it in the English Bible, and both of them were prophetic books of the exile. Okay, during the exile, not the post-exile, not the pre-exile, but the time of exile. Okay, so Ezekiel was a messenger from God to give his message to the Babylonian exiles, okay, who are to the Judean exiles who were living in Babylon at that time, who were taken by deportation into exile, and he was a young priestly person. And he was taken into exile as a young person in his mid 20s, and he acted out most of his prophecies. And the most interesting part of his ministry was that he was dumb most of the time. So God had made him dumb. He could not speak, or he had lost his speech most of the time. And only when God would give his message, at that time only he was able to speak to the people. Otherwise, he was not able to speak to the people. He was dumbfound before that. Okay, otherwise, most of the time of his life. It was a very difficult life that he lived, and it was a very difficult kind of ministry that God had called him to. Okay, so but it was a part of the call, and he faithfully did everything that God had called him to do. Okay, he saw visions, and hence his book is considered to be an apocalyptic in nature. Okay, so it's quite the visions that he sees in his book, or the visions that he has mentioned in his book, is quite apocalyptic in nature. That is about the end times. Okay, so it's quite different. Okay, and that is why many of the people or many of the scholars consider it to be an apocalyptic book of an apocalyptic nature. Okay, so that's something about the introductory part of Ezekiel. Now we'll see about Daniel. So Daniel, however, was a Jewish. On the other hand, we can say that he's not a priest or nothing. He was a Jewish exile from a noble family. Okay, he belonged to a noble family who rose to great heights of prominence in the Babylonian kingdom. He was third in command, as we can see at the time of Darius. Okay, so Daniel was originally in the writing sections. It was not considered to be a prophetical book, and there is a lot of controversy about him being a prophet. Okay, so that we'll be dealing when we talk about Daniel. So it was primarily in the writing section in the Hebrew scriptures, and it is also considered to be as an apocalyptic book. Okay, but later on, when we have the Greek and the English Bibles with us, it was put into the major prophets section, and he's counted as one of the major prophets. Okay, so let's jump quickly into the book of Ezekiel and survey it. Okay, so Ezekiel, prophet Ezekiel, his call and his ministry. Let's look at that first. So Ezekiel belonged to a priestly family. Okay, we also he belongs to a priestly family who served at Jerusalem temple. Okay, so his family was a priestly family, and they served in the Jerusalem temple. So when he was taken into exile or deported into exile, he in around 597 BC, at the time of Jehoiakim, the first trip basically that we can see. So at the time he was only in mid 20s, okay, around 2025. He was somewhere around mid 20s, and a Jewish a person, a boy from a Jewish family, a priestly family, he would be authorized to serve in the temple as priest at the age of 30. Okay, so he was just 25, around 25 right now when he was deported, and he would be imagining, he would be dreaming to become a priest and serve in the temple in the future within next 5 years. But to his shock, to his disappointment, just in mid 20s, around 20, 25 years of age, he was taken into captivity into Babylon, and all his dreams of becoming a priest, all his dreams of serving the Lord was shattered. Okay, then he was just imagining. So it is written that most of the time he would be at Kebar River. He would be looking up into heaven, and he would be just thinking and disappointed with his life, because he was supposed to serve the Lord. He was supposed to serve the Lord in the temple as a priest, but now he is here in the strange land. He is here in Babylon, temple is so far away from him and he cannot go back to his temple. So we see that he's in a time where he's so disappointed and so frustrated in his life that now he will not be able to serve his God. His temple, the temple of the Lord, and the land was so important for the Jewish people, and their religiosity circled around that only. So he was so disappointed that he would not be able to serve as a priest at the temple of Jerusalem. So he was in that mode almost all the years till he was called. Okay, so in exile, he lived in Babylonia near the Kibar River, and that was the canal of the Euphrates at Tel Aviv. Okay, so that is a location where he lived, and most of the people were living there in in Babylon. Okay, so he seems to be well influential. Okay, he was quite influential among the Jewish community because we can see how do we know that, because he had his own house. Okay, most of the people never owned a house, but we see that Ezekiel had his own house even in Babylon. Okay, so he owned that, so he was quite influential and very well to do. Okay, so at that age, at the age of 30, okay, at the age of 30, when he turned 30 years old, when it was time for him to take the responsibility as a priest in the temple, God gave him a different responsibility. So he was called by God at the age of 30 to be a prophet or the messenger of God. Okay, God called him into his service at the age of 30, where he was dreaming to be a priest and serve in the temple. God called him to be a prophet and be his mouthpiece. So the call was accompanied by a vision of God, and it impacted his whole life. The whole life he remembered that vision, and that vision was always in his mind. And because of that, he did everything, whatever he did, it was just in remembrance or in the retrospection of what the experience of the call was like. It influenced his whole life and ministry. He was called to be a prophet to the exiles. Okay? He's a prophet to the exiles. He was to encourage the Jewish people in Babylon in the dark period of exile. Okay, so he ministered for around 20 years. Okay, he ministered for around 20 years, and he was basically meant to minister among the people who were living in Babylon, who were exiles from Judah, to encourage them to encourage them to hold on to the faith, not to lose the faith, not to leave the faith, that they will be going back. Okay, so just to keep that fresh in their mind, to encourage and to tell about God, and to tell about the love of God, to tell about the sadness in the heart of God, to tell about everything that God thinks about them. So whatever God spoke to him, he prophesied it to the people of Judah when they were living in Babylon. Okay, so this concept that the Jewish people had, that their God belonged to their land. Okay, that concept was broken because God was speaking to them in this strange land of Babylon also, without the temple, without anything here. They don't have a temple here. It is not their land, and they are away from their land. So this concept of boxing God, that our God belongs to our land and our people, was broken at that time when Ezekiel was called by God to speak to the people when they were deported to or they were exiled in Babylon. So God spoke to his people in Babylon, not in Jerusalem, not in Judah, not in the temple, but now God is speaking to them in a strange land. God is speaking to them in captivity. God is speaking to them in a different land. So God cannot be restricted or barred from speaking or working in any part of the land. So land doesn't make any difference. So this concept that this land belongs to this God, or this God belongs to this land, okay, that was completely broken because this man of God, Ezekiel, was ministering to them in the land of Babylon, okay, where it was a land which was hated by the Jews because they were taken into captivity. Okay, so God is speaking to them there. So he was called to be a prophet to the exile, and his ministry lasted for 20 years. He saw himself as a watchman or a lookout. Okay, so somebody who had the responsibility of keeping a watch on the spiritual life of the people. He was responsible to have a watch on the spiritual life of the people. He was supposed to tell them, to warn them of any attack from the enemy. What is the work of a watchman? A watchman would used to parade or walk around the top of the wall. Okay, the शहरपना जिसको बोलते हैं, तो he used to walk around on that wall, protective wall, and go around and see if and keep a watch on the outside if any kind of movement is there. So if any enemy is trying to attack. So that was the work of Ezekiel right now. He was supposed to be a spiritual watchman to the people, a lookout where he has to warn the people of the danger if any danger was coming towards them. So he had to be that sensitive. He had to listen to the voice of God, sensitive to the spirit, that if any kind of danger is arriving, he has to tell the people first. Okay, that's what his responsibility was. If he was unable to do that, then the responsibility would fall on his shoulders, because the people would be destroyed and he would be held in responsible, because he could not, or he did not warn the people of the coming danger. So that it was a very responsible position, very difficult position in which Ezekiel was in. So his ministerial style was very distinctive. He saw visions of God and was inspired by the Spirit of God, and he also experienced this kind of ecstasy. He would just go into that different world and experience God and see visions. He would be unconscious for days. And then when he would come back, and then he would start speaking to the people and ministering to the people, and then he would go back into ecstasy. So it was a very different kind of, a very difficult and very different kind of ministry that Ezekiel had and God had called him for. Okay, so the Spirit basically addressed, when the Spirit used to talk to Ezekiel, it called him the Son of Man. Okay, Son of Man, which is a very important term in the Bible, the Son of Man, emphasizing the difference between humanity and the glory of God. Okay, so the Son, when the Spirit is calling him the Son of Man, it is basically emphasizing on the difference between his humanity and how the glory of God was working through him. So that is how the combination was, the humanity and the glory of God working together in that person. Okay, so that is how the Spirit of God addressed the Son of Man, Ezekiel, as a Son of Man. If you remember, in the same way, Jesus is also called the Son of Man in the New Testament. Okay, that's a combination of humanity and the glory of God within. Okay, so that is how we can say that he was a Son of Man. That's how it is called. Okay, so Jesus is also called as a Son of Man in the New Testament. So Ezekiel was emotionally one of the most afflicted countrymen, because not only of his exiles, but because he was beleaguered by the inhabitants of the Jerusalems. Okay, so we have to understand that he felt so much. He empathized, not only sympathized, but he empathized with the afflictions of his countrymen. Okay, where they were living in Babylon, and they were away from their hometown, from Jerusalem. So he was so much in afflicted, so much in pain, we can say, for the people and for his countrymen. And he was so much in agony because of his people and in his country that they have lost. Okay, so we can also see that he was quite similar to Jeremiah in that aspect, when he used to weep and cry for and feel so much for his countrymen, and also that he acted out the parable. So most of his prophecies were acted out. He was not only oracles were there, he was used to speak and give the message verbally also, but we also see that most of his prophecies or the messages from God were acted out. So most of the time, God did not allow him to speak, but he would just act out things. People would consider him to be mad. People would consider him to just mock him, and just look like he's such a mad guy, that he's doing what all he is doing. Okay, sleeping on one side for so many days, sleeping on the other side for so many days, building something on the ground and cutting his hair and shaving his head, a lot of things that he was doing. So we can see that he did all those things and God did not allow him to speak. That was a very strange thing. And most of the prophecies he did was through acting. Most of his prophecies were acted out. That's how God worked through him. He had to act out every prophecy, and that's how he ministered unto the people. Okay, so let's look at the book now. The book is written entirely in the first person, except for the note in chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. So it's a first person, like the one who is doing it is writing. It's something like that. Okay, so I am Ezekiel and I am writing, I am prophesying, I am writing. That's the kind of writing that is found in the book of Ezekiel. So the prophecies are meticulously arranged. That means it is arranged in a proper order. Okay, it's arranged in a proper order with all the details of months, days, time, everything is mentioned. It's so accurately mentioned, so meticulously mentioned, so orderly mentioned. Okay, the message and the language is consistent, it is repetitive, and there is a characteristic of the phase that was running throughout at that time. So we can see that the language is very straight, very consistent, very repetitive, and the main characteristic is it is talking about that phase which he is going through. okay, what the phase is going through in his life, what phase the country is going through, what phase his people is going through. It is very much reflected in his language and writing in the message. Okay, so he writes ostentatiously about his visions like an apocalyptic book. He describes it in so vividly. He describes his visions so vividly that it looks like an apocalyptic book. So it is like an apocalyptic book, and it is counted as an apocalyptic book also. So his descriptions of the visions are so vivid and so clear and so nicely done that it's so ostentatiously done that it is just like an apocalyptic book, just like Revelation has so many visions. Revelation has so many, pictures that it brings to your mind. It is so vivid description of every vision. And in this similar manner, we can see that Ezekiel has also been written. Okay, and it is very close to the book of Ezekiel also. And we see that Revelation has borrowed some visions from Ezekiel also. So Ezekiel becomes a very important book because we consider Revelation to be a very important book. So we can see that it is quite similar to the book of Ezekiel, and there are a lot of similarities found in the book of Ezekiel and the book of Revelation also. And the Revelation has borrowed some ideas from Ezekiel also. Okay, so like Isaiah and Jeremiah, Ezekiel also we see his book also has two volumes. The second volume has three parts to it. Okay, so the first volume is a major part, and then we have the second volume, which has the call of Ezekiel and the fall of Jerusalem. The second part has oracles. Second section has oracles against the surrounding nations, and the third has restoration of Israel. Okay, so let's enter into the message. Let's enter into the message of the book. Okay, so we see that Ezekiel believed that the Babylonians were punished, were an instrument of God to punish the people of Judah. Okay, that was what Ezekiel clearly believed and heard from God. Okay, so he clearly believed that Babylonians were not their enemies. Babylonians were God's instrument, God's chosen instruments at that time to punish the nation of Judah. Okay, to punish the nation of Judah, since they had rebelled against God and they were not turning towards God. So many prophets had come and they had been prophesying and telling them to repent, 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 and turn back to God, but they were not doing that. So Ezekiel clearly states and mentions and believes that Babylon was God's instrument of punishment towards the people of Judah, since they had not turned away from their rebellious ways. So Ezekiel actually saw the flying throne of God leaving the temple in Ezekiel chapters 10 and 11. So he sees that in a vision, he sees God leaving the temple, flying away. His throne is flying away from the temple, which simply means that God is leaving Jerusalem. Okay, God is leaving Jerusalem because the people did not serve him there. Okay, why is God leaving Jerusalem? Because his people did not serve him there. They were not faithful to him. They were not obedient to him. So his throne is leaving, flying away, and leaving the temple, flying away and leaving Jerusalem. And it simply meant that God wants to leave that place. God is leaving that place. God's presence has left that place. But God would return to Jerusalem when the exiles would come back. So when the remnants would return, God will also return along with them. Okay, so he belonged to the priestly family. So we see a lot of priestly aspect is found in the book, a lot of ritualistic aspects, a lot of ritualistic purity of the people is found in the book. So he believed in the ritual purity of the people and he emphasized all those things in his book also. He hoped that even the dead nation would be revived by the Spirit of God. Okay, so he believes that the Spirit of God has so much power that even the dead nation can be revived, which we can see in chapter 37 of Ezekiel. And they would, if and after the revival, after they would be revived to life and after they will be brought back to life, they would keep his commandments, and God would give them a new heart and new spirit. That's what Ezekiel believed, and he has spoken in his message. Okay, he says that God's spirit is so powerful that it can revive a dead nation, just like Judah. And then after they have been revived, they will be God will be with them, giving his commandments, giving a new heart and a new spirit to them. So the last section describes in detail of the new community. Okay, a new community that was going to be formed, and that God will dwell in them. God will dwell around them, and the new temple in Jerusalem, where God will dwell and His glory will come back. That's what Ezekiel is talking about. So this is a temporary time when they are away, and God is also away from their nation. But God will come back with them and give them a new heart, give them a new spirit, and God will God will live among them, and His glory is going to dwell among them. That's what Ezekiel is telling. So Ezekiel's message is on God's punishment for sin, with the hope of restoration by the Spirit. So we can see there is two parts to it, that because they have sinned, God has punished them. Okay, because they have sinned, God has punished them, but there is a hope. But there is a hope of restoration, and God will restore them by His Spirit. That is what God is telling through Ezekiel as his main message. Okay, so let's look at the division of the book lastly. So Ezekiel chapter 1 to 24 talks about the judgment on Israel. Ezekiel chapter 25 to 32 talks about judgment on the nations. Then Ezekiel chapter 33 to 48 talks about restoration of Israel. Okay, so this is all that we can survey through this interesting book of Ezekiel. I really love the book of Ezekiel, and I enjoy the book of Ezekiel among all the prophets. It's a very wonderful book to read and understand, and just to go through. Okay, so that's where we end with the survey of the book of Ezekiel. Let's move into the book of Daniel now and survey the book of Daniel quickly. So the book of Daniel was placed among the writing section, that is Ketubim, in the Hebrew canon, but in the Christian canon, it is placed in the prophetical section. Okay, so the difference is difference in views are is found regarding the calling of it a prophetic book. So most of the scholars do not call it or consider it to be a prophetic book. Okay, we'll find the reasons why. So the reason is found in the person of Daniel. Why? Okay, so Daniel was a Judean exile. He was an exile in Babylon court. Okay, he was in court, and possibly he belonged to a noble family. He belonged to a noble and rich family of Jerusalem, of Judah, and he was taken into the Babylonian court, and he was employed there, and he actually worked at a very higher level. Okay, he was deported as a boy a few years earlier than Ezekiel. So even before Ezekiel, he had come in the first deportation. Okay, he was a statesman. He was not a prophet. Okay, we have to clearly understand that he was a statesman used by God in the prophetic ministry as his messenger, but professionally he was not called to be a prophet. The prophetic call was not given to Daniel, but God used him in speaking, delivering his message to the people. Okay, so the book, let's look, and that was one of the reasons why it is not considered to be a prophetic book. It is considered to be the writings. Okay, and it is considered to be apocalyptic book, but not a prophetic book, because of Daniel being a statesman, not called to be a prophet. Okay, so the book divides into two parts. Okay, the first part chronologically relates to the various experiences of Daniel and his friends while in exile. This section is historical narrative and reflects the cultural context of the event. So we have to understand that their book is divided into two parts. The first part, it consists of the life of Daniel and his friends and their experiences in exile. Okay, the personal, the friends and him, and how they, what all they experienced in their life in the exile. That is mentioned. All those events are mentioned in the first part. So it gives a very good historical narrative of this time, and it reflects on about the culture, the kind of culture that was there in Babylon, and the events that took place in Babylon at that time. So it's a very good source of material for us to know the culture and the events that took place in that time when Daniel was there. The second part, nonetheless, is a part of the four apocalyptic visions that he saw in his later years, the second part of his life. Okay, the first part was with his friends and everything that is happening at that time. Second part is basically the time when he sees four visions, apocalyptic visions. Okay, and he describes it in a very vivid way, apocalyptic way. And this apocalyptic imagery in these chapters use a lot of symbols and numbers, okay, to represent the significant events. So we have to understand these apocalyptic literatures have a lot of images, they have a lot of symbols, they have a lot of numbers, because of which and they represent certain things. They are representative of certain significant events and things and people. That is why they are called apocalyptic books. Okay, and the way to study apocalyptic book is completely different than we study the other books of the Bible. That is why to study the book of Daniel, you need to understand the study or understand how to study apocalyptic literature. It's a completely different kind of study that we have. So Revelation, then we have Daniel, then we have parts of Ezekiel that is completely apocalyptical, which to understand we need to have the understanding of how to understand apocalyptic literature. Okay, so first we have to do that. So the book is written in both Hebrew, that is Jewish language, and Aramaic language, that is international language at the later time. Okay, so the Hebrew sections, basically the Hebrew section deal with topics directly related to Israel, while the Aramaic section relates to informations concerning the great empire and the eventual culmination of the society. So wherever the Hebrew language is used, it's only for the Hebrew people, the Jewish people. But where Aramaic language is used, it is for the sections that relate to the greater empire, the great empire of the Babylon, and how it is going to end. So all those things are written in the Aramaic language. So the message of the book assumes what is called an apocalyptic worldview. Okay, apocalyptic worldview, that God who created the world is still in control of the event and the history, is still in control of the events of history to bring them to his planned end. So this message is, this book simply gives us the message of the apocalyptic worldview, that is that God is in complete control. Okay, the God is in complete control, and he controls the history, he controls the past, he present controls the present, and he will fulfill his plans till the end. That is what the main thing that the book is trying to tell us. So authorship and date, the book is dated after the time of exile in the 2nd century BC, according to a scholar. And according to some other scholars, the writer belongs to the 2nd century BC, who used Daniel's name to encourage the Jews at the time of Antiochus persecution. So in the middle, in the intertestamental period, there was a lot of persecution that was taking place. So some of the scholars tell us that under the umbrella of Daniel's name, somebody has written this book to as an apocalyptic book to encourage the people to hold on to their hope at the time of persecution under Antiochus Epiphanes. Okay, so they claim that there are discrepancies in the first 6 chapters in the historical situation in the Babylon and the Persian court. So there are some discrepancies found in the first 6 chapters, according to history, as they say, in the Babylonian and the Persian court. So, example, they say Belshazzar was not the king, but the son of Nabonidus, the last king of Babylon. But the recent archaeology discoveries tell us that Belshazzar was a regent while his father was away, and so exercised full power, control, and reign over the whole kingdom. And that is why we see that Daniel was made the in charge, and he was third in position, because Belshazzar was on the top, and then Nabonidus was on the top, and second rule was Belshazzar, and only the third rule was Daniel. Okay, so we can see that is how the hierarchy went, and that is why Daniel was in the third position in the kingdom. Okay, and he was not in the second position; he was in the third position. Belshazzar was in the second position. Nabonidus was on the top as the king. Okay. Secondly, we see that they claim that Darius the Mede was not the conqueror of Babylon, but Cyrus the Persian, who followed by his son Cambyses, and only after the Darius the Persian, not the Mede. Okay, so uh, they say that Darius was not the king at that time who conquered the Babylon, but Cyrus did. Okay, and that's why there is so much of confusion, and names and confusion is there. So that's why they date the book of Daniel in a different way or a later period. Okay, yet Cyrus, we can see that Cyrus joined the Median kingdom to defeat Babylon, and was probably the grandson of the Median king. Okay, so he was the grandson descendant of the Median king also. Okay, so he's from both the sides, we can say. And then we see that is how Cyrus is supposed to be the person who defeated Babylon. Okay, so some scholars suggest that Darius was his median name. So this is the same person having two names. Cyrus and Darius was the same person having two names. One was median name, one was Persian name. That's what some of the scholars are trying to say. So the problem is the accurate description of the Greek kingdoms from Alexander to Antiochus IV in Daniel's predictions and visions. Okay, they seem to be so clear, and so they claim that it was written somewhere at the time of Antiochus to encourage the people, the Jewish people. So what they are saying is, because Daniel has so clearly, so vividly spoken and written detailed form about the future at the time of intertestamental period and the fall of the kingdoms and the rising of the kingdoms, that it becomes difficult to understand that how can a prophet or a person write so clearly or describe so clearly about a future time. Okay, so they're undermining that when God speaks, he speaks very clearly, and if he wants somebody to write the future clearly, he can make the future write clearly, make him to write the future clearly. So the problem in the authorship is because Daniel has given so vivid descriptions of the future kingdoms that they are unable to understand that this is the that it has been written early at an earlier date. So they want to date it in the second century, believing that it all has happened and somebody has written it during the time of persecution to encourage the people. So the real problem of the critical scholars is to accept the supernatural power of the accurate prophecies of the prophet of God. Okay, so we have to accept that God can reveal things in a clear manner, and we have to accept that. So if an anonymous author wrote it in the second century, okay, then how did he predict the Roman Empire? Because it was still further. So he has also predicted about the Roman Empire. It was still in future. Okay, so how can he predict the Roman Empire in the second century? Okay, that's what he wants to sell. Second century BC. How can he talk about the Roman Empire, which is in after or during the time of Jesus Christ? And so clearly, he's talking about defeat and everything about the time of Jesus Christ. Okay, 200 years in advance. So it is God, His divine interpretation and His divine inspiration that led Daniel to write things about the future so clearly and vividly. Okay, so then we have the division of the book. Daniel 1, Daniel, the first part, Daniel and his companions at the Babylonian court. Then Daniel 2, Daniel interprets Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Then we have the three friends in the fiery furnace, and we have Daniel interprets another dream. It is fulfilled by Nebuchadnezzar goes mad. Nebuchadnezzar goes mad. Then we have the writing in the wall at Belshazzar's feast. And then we have Darius sends Daniel to the lion's den. Then we have the second part of Daniel, that is the four visions, the four beasts, and one like the Son of Man, the ram and he goat, and the little horn. Then we have Jeremiah's prophecy of 70 weeks explained, and then we have a vision of the last days. Okay, in Septuagint, there are several additions to the Hebrew versions which are included in the Apocrypha. Okay, in the Apocrypha, the different section that we have, the Apocrypha. The three main ones are the prayer of Azariah, the song of the three men, and the Susanna and the Bell and the Dragon, which is the postscript. Okay, so we can see that these portions are added later on. So these are put into the apocryphal version. Okay, so this is what we had to share about on the survey of the book of Daniel. Okay, so we'll meet again with the minor prophets. Thank you and God bless you.